Welcome to week 2 or session 2 of Action Research in the Classroom. We're going to go ahead and jump in with our week 2 agenda for the screencast today. So week 2, some of our key points that we were working on, review the key points from the week 1 and week 2 assigned readings. So I'm going to take you through some things that I think are just some key understandings. I won't reread the text with you, but I'm just going to give you kind of the abridged version of what I think are the important points. We're going to delve deeper into some of the definitions and processes of action research. We're going to strengthen understanding of the action research in classrooms. I've provided some additional resources in Moodle this week based on an initiative a few years ago that was from the Kansas Professional Development Schools, or the PDS. A good portion of the work that student teachers were going through as they entered classrooms for that first experience focused them on completing action research projects. So I've shared a document that captured a lot of that work. It's just another example. I had a good question this week from one of our colleagues in the class that just said, when I provide resources like that, what should you do with those? How in-depth should you read? And I thought that was a fair question. There won't be any type of assessment based on that. I only provide those resources or additional resources just for support for you. So I don't necessarily expect you to read those and hang on every word and be able to complete a performance task based on that information. It's truly just meant to help you kind of narrow down how you're going to conduct your own research and formulate your own research focus and ideas for what you want to do for the project. So thank you for that question that was raised. We're also going to continue to identify potential research questions and problem statements to help improve your instruction and learning, ultimately student learning in your classroom. So this week and we'll talk a little bit about it before we end the screencast, but I provided an activity where you're going to have an opportunity to look at a series of action research questions and decide how to make them better, because a lot of the questions may be broad in scope and not have the specificity that we potentially would want as we formulate our own questions for the project. So in sum, this week you're going to have a couple of activities to complete that are going to put you in good position to start writing next week. By the time we get to the end of week 3, you're going to be submitting your first drafts for the early sections of the project. So these first 2 weeks are a little bit loose, building that background knowledge so that you can be successful as we get into the meat of building your projects. So take it in stride and know that by the end of week 3, you're going to have a draft due. So that will help pace you into your thinking this week and getting serious about your focus topic and possibilities. One of the things that I think is important to kind of focus on is that action research and the definition overall. We talked a little bit in week 1 about what action research is, and I'm just going to provide you another establishment of SET. So this comes from what once was the National Staff Development Council and has recently rebranded in the last few years as Learning Forward, but overall it's an organization that is focused on professional development for educators and leaders across the profession. And action research, I just want to continue to reinforce, is a professional development growth process. And so it's become more widely accepted as a piece of individualized, personalized professional development. And even a national organization is signing off in that aspect by saying that action research is a process in which participants examine their own educational practice systematically and carefully using the techniques of research. So we talked last week about the difference between traditional research and action research, but again, this is an individualized process, and that's mainly the difference in not having an external body come in and conduct traditional research. So this week we're going to get a little bit further into your own topics. Action research is based on some of these assumptions. One is that teachers and principals work best on problems they identify for themselves rather than having an external force come in or organization come in and identify what the problem is that you need to work on. It kind of gets back to focus on the closest area of control, and that's what you can control in your own buildings, your own classrooms, and let's make plans for improvement in those areas rather than having someone externally come in and say, well, this isn't working well, let's fix it. So taking control and being responsive is one good piece that action research is based upon. It's also looking at giving teachers and principals the ability to be more effective and encouraging to examine and assess your own work and then consider ways of working differently. So it is a focus on continuous improvement and growth. The third piece is teachers and principals need time and space away from their daily routine to think deeply about their work And I think this is one of probably the biggest benefits of this course, that by the end of the course, you will be reflecting back and thinking, man, that was powerful. Because this is so individualized in that I'm not assigning you what you're working on, you're developing the ideas for what you want to tackle. You're going to have the time and space because you have to complete the work for this class, where typically we say reflection, reflective practice is a great thing, but when do we actually take the time or find the time to do that as practitioners? I can admit to you that is not my strong suit. I do a lot of reflection time in the car, but I don't purposely take time and space away from my daily routine to say this is my time that I'm going to work on reflective practice and how I can be better at my job or how I can be better about serving others. So I hope you enjoy the time in this class that you're going to have to spend on that, because it is dedicated to you thinking deeply about your work. The last piece on here is teachers and principals can provide help, support, and encouragement by working collaboratively. We touched on that collaborative process last week. You're going to see a little bit more information coming up in what Mertler tells us, not necessarily in this week's chapter, but in a future chapter. And you're going to see this point driven home several times in this week's screencast about encouraging you to not just make this an isolated assignment, but reaching out to your colleagues. If you have professional learning communities that are active in your building, you know, now's a great time to reach out to your colleagues in a PLC where you're looking at student data and you're trying to formulate plans and interventions to support increases in student learning for identified problems that you're trying to solve. Encourage your colleagues to be a part of this process with you. And I can't stress enough, go and talk to your building administrator or your direct supervisor and let them know you're enrolled in a class to complete your research requirements for your master's degree program, and your requirement in this course is to conduct some action research in your own classroom. I would do that early on, and please communicate with me if you run into any challenges. A few years ago I had a challenge in one district that the administrator felt that this was research, truly research, and it needed to go through an internal review board for approval. We are not going to be publishing any of your data, so this is all meant for you to focus on your reflective practice. Everything that you share, as we get further in the project, we're going to talk about confidentiality and that none of your students will be identified. So I can help with some of those pieces if questions do come up as you reach out to your supervisors or building administrators. But I encourage you to include them and let them know what you're working on, because this is a powerful process and it shouldn't be something that you're doing alone in isolation. And I'll build up some opportunities for you to collaborate with others in the class as we further identify a research topic and what we're interested in. So we'll put some role-alike groups together so you can collaborate. We touched on this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we did talk about that action research is not traditional research. It's not the usual thing that we do when we think about teaching. Again, when do we take that time to reflect, and when do we actually say, hey, I'm going to do some research on this and I'm going to see whether or not my practice is truly effective, and then I'm going to use the data and I'm going to go and review what others have done through research databases, and I'm going to change my practice and I'm going to review again. We usually don't take that much detailed time and specificity to inform our practice. The other piece is it's not only problem solving. The action research process is meant to bring about solutions and help you know whether or not you're being effective. So it is problem solving paired with action. It's not research on other people. That's that kind of traditional piece. It's about you. It's research on you and your effective practice. It's not the scientific method applied to teaching. So I won't spend much more time there. So teachers as researchers, as we get into the project development, this is about developing research questions based on your own curiosity. What do you want to work on? And that's why we did the right question, little brainstorming activity in week 1, so that you could kind of hone in on what are you curious about? What are those pieces that if you just take the time to sit and ask questions about what's going on in your own classroom or your own instruction, that you can develop those curiosity points based on what might be topics of research for you for the project. It's examining your underlying assumptions about teaching and learning, and that's kind of my role. As you post the right question and responses, I'm going to go in and I'm going to ask some questions, or I'm going to guide you to think differently. Depending on where you're at in your career, you may have little experience. You may be in your first 3 years of the profession and have a whole road of growth ahead of you. You may be on the tail end of your years of experience and kind of approaching different opportunities in life. Wherever you're at, there's always opportunities to grow. And part of what my job is to challenge you to make sure you're not sticking with underlying assumptions about teaching and learning. I'm going to tell you one example, and take this as coaching. There is a frequent piece to problem solving that I see in terms of identifying student behaviors. And it's very, very easy for us to focus on student behaviors and trying to think what is wrong with that child. I'm going to be there as your coach, and I'm going to back you up. And part of my background is in special education, and that was where my doctoral research came about, is looking at what's the function of the student's behavior, especially when we're working with early adult, well, I'm not even going to say that, any child. Because of the developmental variety, the developmental pace that children experience, not all of our kids are developing at the exact same time and pace. So there's always going to be a why behind why a child interacts and chooses to act the way they do. And I think a common assumption for some of us and some of our colleagues is to blame the child for that. And one of the things that I'll challenge back is what's happening in the learning environment that is preventing that child from staying engaged. So that's just one example, and that's a frequent assumption that is made that sometimes we can correct if we think differently about the environment versus the child. So that's just one example there, and we'll talk more about it. Collecting data systematically from and with students. So that's part of the action research process, and I'm going to just take an opportunity to talk about, as you think about your projects and you think about the role your students play in relation to the focus topic, we'll start getting into looking at how we're going to collect data in 2 weeks. And one of the things that I'll encourage you to think about is how can your students be a part of helping you collect data. So some very powerful learning comes from action research when we engage our students in maybe some interviews, one-on-one, or we give them some reflection opportunities, whether that's an exit ticket where we have them think differently about how they learned in the assignment. But students can be a powerful part of giving you feedback, and feedback is data that will be collected for this project. So that's kind of a fun piece. I always love it when we engage our kids, and it's always great learning for us all. We're also going to be sharing and discussing the data and research methodology with fellow teachers. Part of the very last step of the project you will be doing is you're going to be identifying how you're going to disseminate this information to others. And I will continue to reinforce along the way, talk with your colleagues. They're the ones that are right there with you, that are seeing what you're experiencing, that may be experiencing the same challenges, and have them be a part of helping through this process. So this is not isolation, this is collaborative. Furthermore, we're going to get into analyzing and interpreting data. So we'll talk about that in several weeks when we get into having collected the data. We'll talk about how we're going to analyze and how we're going to write about the data in our project work. You're going to be doing a ton of writing. So starting next week, I alluded to it, you'll have your first draft due. Every week from week 3 forward, you'll have a draft of a section that will be due. And I stair-step that to push you so that you're on track to complete the whole project by week 7. I promise you, once we get through week week 3, week 4, those will be the hardest because starting is the hardest part. Once we get through those first couple of assignments and writing the draft, the rest of it will start to fall into place. So hang in there and know that I'm going to be right there with you, and I'll be giving you feedback weekly on your writing drafts. So you'll get that immediate one-on-one coaching from me. You're going to be sharing findings with students, colleagues, members of the community. We've already talked a little bit about that. We talked about discussing with colleagues among practice, theory, and research. And ultimately, this is assuming responsibility for your own professional development. We, I think, have been growing as a profession, and there's a whole lot more thinking around stopping the one-size-fits-all professional learning opportunities and individualizing the growth. So this truly is an opportunity to take responsibility for what you want to learn about and becoming ultimately a better educator. Let's briefly review some of the reading, and I won't spend a ton of time on this, but this is basically just some different ways to think about the process and the methodology for action research. So again, I won't spend a whole lot on each of these, but I'm going to pull in some different references. You've got the Mertler text. We've also used Sager and Lewin and Schmuck as other authors that have provided some good thinking around action research. So we're going to talk a little bit about the processes for action research. Schmuck, in some of his writings, talked about 3 phases of continuous improvement. So again, thinking about what we take time for as educators, we're really good at trying to problem solve on the fly for different things that come up. But again, as I stated earlier, we're not really good about taking the time for reflective practice and actually doing the action research to implement a change, looking at the data and really collaborating and sharing out what's happening, what's being effective. So Schmuck basically said there are 3 critical pieces of focusing on continuous improvement in schools. So sometimes I think in our improvement processes that we have in our schools and our districts, we don't necessarily think about all 3. So that's just kind of a piece to think through. Sager talks about the entry points to action research and that really it's a 5-step problem-solving process. So think about where we are right now. We're in problem formulation. We're going to ultimately move into data collection. We'll have a plan for that before we get into it. We'll analyze the data. We're going to report the results. And then you're going to talk about what have you learned and what's your future action. So then it would roll into the next steps for you. Where do you go with the information now that you've learned more about what's effective practice in your classroom for your learners? Schmuck again talked about the STP, and S stands for your current situation, T stands for your target, and P stands for the P's that you see reflected on the screen, the plan, process, procedures, and project. So looking at your situation, looking at your target, and that's kind of where that Right Question project got you thinking about. So what's your situation, what's really kind of getting under your skin, when you want to make improvements for. That kind of helps you identify what your target might be for the research process. And then all of the steps in the middle is what we'll work on in developing over the next few weeks in your project. So simply put, you're either focusing on your situation where you're collecting data to better understand your situation, or you're on your path where you're collecting data to better understand your plans for being effective. That's another piece to this. So think about how you want to progress. If you focus on the path, you're looking to see if interventions are really improving situation and meeting the target you intended to reach. And if you're focusing on the situation, you're really researching to better understand the why behind something happening. So those are kind of 2 different nuances to what you might want to do for the method of your project. Do you want to focus on the path and improving the processes through an intervention you implement? Or do you want to look at the situation more deeply and better understand why something's happening? It ties back to the behavior, student behavior and engagement example that we talked about in one of the earlier screens. I think another important visual, I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but this kind of helped me think about how to coach you guys through the identification of the action research project. So one of the things in force field analysis that I think is helpful, and this is the work of Lewin that comes up with this force field analysis, but think about your current situation, and as you identify an action research topic, think about what are the facilitating forces that can help you get to the desirable state. So the desirable state's over on the right-hand side. And what are the restraining forces, or what are the blocks? What are some of the inhibitors that will keep you from getting into that desirable state, but keep maybe pushing you to an undesirable state? So one of the things that I will encourage you to think about, and I've seen some of it, and I do every semester, is one of those things that get under our skin, particularly in the upper elementary grades and secondary teachers, is homework. How do we get kids to complete their homework? Well, I'm going to ask you this. In force field analysis, what are the restraining forces? Kids aren't doing their homework, but why aren't they doing their homework? Is that really a solvable problem that we can handle? Because we know that through all the different situations our kids may come from, when they leave us, where are they going and what kind of support do they have? How many activities are they involved in? Are our kids having to go and work until 11 o'clock, closing down a store and not having time, or just being beat down tired by the time they get home, that really focusing on homework is not something they have within their capacity? Those are restraining forces. Those you aren't going to be able to solve. So I would take that off the table. I would go and use this force field analysis as a way to help you identify what is a solvable target for you for your research. Homework I would take off the table. I would encourage that not to be a focus for the action research project for that reason. Schmuck and Runkle, this will be the last one that we kind of look at in terms of problem solving, very similar to the others, but they kind of go a little bit more deeper in not just a 5-step process, but specify the problem, assess the situation with that force field analysis, specify multiple solutions, what are the possibilities that you might be able to tackle, then plan for action, anticipate the obstacles, take the action, and evaluate. So when we get into our project development, you're going to see a little bit of a hybrid between Sager and also the Schmuck and Runkle problem solving steps. One of the articles that some of you will read this week in an activity that I've got, it's an article jigsaw, so based on where your birthday falls in the months of the year, you'll be assigned a short article. It's only a couple of pages in each case. One of the articles that some of you will read is based on Emily Calhoun's work, and she has written about 3 different approaches to action research. So you'll have an opportunity, whether you read the article or not, you'll see some of the summaries from some of your colleagues in the class that have read it. But she talks about individual teacher research that can happen, collaborative action research, and what I wanted to draw your attention to is there are instances in the country where schools have embarked on school-wide action research. Again, as part of maybe their continuous improvement, or now that the Kansas schools are working in KISA for the accreditation at the district level, school-wide action research could be a really nice piece once the target areas for accreditation are focused on what are the goals that you're going to tackle, and then conduct a school-wide action research plan. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's interesting to kind of hear what's happening in other places in the country. With that said, one of the activities this week is an online article jigsaw. So there's a PDF that has a packet, so you have all of the articles that are assigned. And then I just ask you to identify based on your birthday month where you fall in the examples above. If you have a January or March birthday, January through March birthday, you'll read Article 1. If you're April through June, you'll read Article 2. If you're July through September, Article 3. And October through December, review the excerpt from Article 4. So I'm going to pop up on the screen right now. I don't have this activated yet, but I will soon. But you will see the same article here in Moodle, Assignment 2.2, Article Jigsaw. You've got the PDF file right here that you can pop open. Once that downloads, we'll go ahead and pop that open, and that will be a little bit interesting here. So let me get that. So there's Emily Calhoun's article. So you can just scroll through and identify where your articles fall in the packet. There's article number 2, using reflective questioning to promote collaborative dialogue. Again, short, to the point, not a lot. I'm just asking you to summarize these in the activity. So we've got professional development through action research, McKay, that's Article 3. And then I'll just briefly here, Article 4 is actually out of, I think, a National Staff Development publication. They put together a whole toolkit for schools a few years ago, and then they rebranded as Learning Forward, but there's good information here. So it kind of gets into the steps of action research. It gives you a little bit more meat about identifying a problem, so it's good stuff. And you've got a few more: gathering data, next steps, benefits, and a final page. So again, it's just meant to be an activity that will provide some additional knowledge for you, additional resources, and so that is a part of the assigned work this week. There you go for references. So if you want to use any of those as you start to work on the action research project, anything I give you is fair game to include in your project. So that'll be a question that will come up later. If I've given you something you want to reference it as a citation as you work on your research-based support for change, any of the resources that I share with you or I have you share with each other, you can utilize for your project. So for the task, as you read what's assigned for your jigsaw, you'll go into the forum, the discussion forum for session 2, and I ask you to just give 3 to 4 main points from the article, and then what you really took away. What's your connection to that? So text to self. How do you connect? So be sure to log in and view some of the other posts, especially if they're in an article that you didn't read. So basically you can get the summary, and if you want to go back and take a look at those other pieces, then that might be helpful as well. So just another quick pop-up. When you get into the assignment area here, you will see that I've already populated a discussion area for each one of the articles. So I just ask you to click, and if you read Calhoun, I would just ask you then to reply to this post, so that way all of the threads will stay together and it'll be kind of handy for us, okay? So that is just the quick of where we're going this week for that assigned activity. Let me pop this back up. Okay, next step. Guidelines for research questions. One of the activities that I have given you, again, is to reinforce your understanding for action research question development. So you will see assignment 2.3 this week is revising AR questions. So there is a action research question document with some sample questions. And so I just want you to think about how well will each question work, what problems might each question present, what suggestions do you have for revising each question. Those are 3 bullets to guide you. All I need you to do this week, or all I want you to do, is redevelop the question. How would you revise it to make it a better question? I just want you to think about it. There's no right or wrong. I just want you to put some thought behind it. Instead of what motivates students, that's a very, very broad topic. So if you were going to use student motivation as a focus for your action research, think about a few things of specificity you could add into there to kind of help guide others to, if they read your research question, what motivates students, I'm going to need a little bit more information about what you're going to tackle in terms of. So maybe it's like, how does the use of technology, integrated resources motivate students for whatever the focus is for the assignment you want to tackle. So I'm asking you, there are 8 questions, and there's a little bit of help, examples of good questions. Again, this came from National Staff Development Council a few years ago. But take those 8 questions, think about how you would rewrite them, and then what I would say is go into the assignment revising AR question, and you can either attach it as a separate document, or you can just paste it right into the submission screen when you submit the assignment. That actually is pretty handy, and then I can give you comments back on it within Moodle. All right, so there's a little bit of information for you on 2 of the assignments that are due this week for our work. So basically, you'll see this in the handout as well, but guidelines for the research questions, you want to make sure it's significant and meaningful for you. So that's where the example, what motivates students, what's going to be meaningful for you. Drill it down a little bit, give a little bit more specificity. Make sure it's going to be manageable. That goes back to my comments about homework. Is homework an actual manageable research question? Or manageable might also even relate to our timeline for the course. We now have 6 weeks left in the class. We'll have a break, possibly depending on where the sequence of the class falls, fall or spring, but we'll have a break in the class for Thanksgiving or possibly spring break if you're in the spring semester. So you have a little bit of time to catch your breath, but think about a timeline. Are you going to tackle a research project that's going to require you to collect data that you may not have until the second semester of the school year? And if you're in the fall class and you're doing maybe student growth, and you're going to look at a growth measure that's going to require you to have the end of the year data collection or a mid-year point, and you may not have that accessible before the end of the semester, is that really a good data point to utilize? Is it contextual? Is it really related to the context of supporting learning in your class? Are you clearly stating? Are you open-ended and leading to other questions? Are you very, very focused and honed in? So those are just some guidelines. You can keep it open-ended, and that's okay, because as you get into the research, it may lead to other questions and future directions that you can write about at the end of the project. So again, just get started in thinking about what questions you want to work with, and I will give you feedback on that. And that AR question revision activity will also be helpful for that. So you've got a little bit more. We've talked about it, so I won't go into huge detail there. So overall, just in sum, Session 2 assignment, you're going to read Chapter 3 in Mertler, Planning for Action Research, which Mertler does a really good job of starting to stair-step you into now where we're going to be going next week in the first draft due. Next week, I'll give you more information, but you're going to be writing your introduction, which kind of tells about you, it tells about your learning environment, it tells about kind of some of your struggles and why you've identified the topic that you're going to utilize for your action research project. So that's pretty easy because you're writing about your current situation. The other piece that we'll turn in next week is we'll be starting to develop the research-based support for change, which is the second section of the project that we'll develop. This week's assignment in locating 2 research articles and writing a brief abstract for each will stair-step you into that assignment as well. Abstracts and article citations, I'll have you post them in a discussion forum. You'll just attach the abstract, or you can copy paste it again into the forum post. But here's the deal with this. By having you share your abstracts, they're worth 20 points each, so it's a significant assignment in terms of what we've experienced so far. But it will also help us build collective research support for each other. So if you have some common topics, I alluded to it earlier, if you see a research citation in one of those forum posts for the research abstracts that might be helpful to your own topic, your own project, just because another student shared that, we are collaborative in nature, it's okay to utilize that. You can go utilize that citation in your own work. So we're trying to help each other build up our research base and also learn a little bit about research in doing so, because you're going to get into research publications, you're going to get into databases like ERIC, or you can use Google Scholar, or I highly encourage you to get into the Collins Library because they have a fantastic resource that they provide us in a number of online databases so that you can get in and actually find the research without having to leave your home or go to the library. And if you need help with any of that, let me know. They have great support also through the Collins Library. You can reach out to our reference librarians and they will be supportive. But for this week, the abstracts and the article citations, I want you to find research-based articles to read. Don't just grab something out of a publication or Scholastic or a teacher's magazine. It has to be research-based. So you'll ultimately write your abstract and you will post it into the forum. Mertler in Chapter 3 gives you a little bit of help in what an article abstract is and also how to construct those. Page 69, he gives you some information right around that area about using the ERIC database and also using Google Scholar. And on page 69, second paragraph, he talks about of great importance to the researcher is the abstract. So the abstract is a brief summary of the contents of the document, including the results and conclusions of the study if appropriate. Only by reading the document abstract can you really be sure whether you want to obtain the full document for complete review. So I believe if you review the APA guidelines, an abstract typically is only about 250 words. It's short, so this is not a two-page assignment. This is short and to the point. What you're looking for is the results of the study. So I typically say, what did they do and what did they end up with? How did they approach the research? What did they do and what did they find? That's really the brief piece of an abstract. So that's what you're going for this week, and you're going to have two that you're going to submit and turn in. So page 69 in Mertler is a good support. And he talks about ERIC database and Google Scholar, which are the two that I typically recommend as well. So if you need any help with those, reach out. And then writing the lit review is the other big piece of Chapter 3, which again stair-steps us into where we're going with one of our assignments next week in developing the research-based support for change. So please read that Chapter 3. It's good information and it'll help you build a good scaffold for next week. I'm also going to ask you to send me an email and just talk to me a little bit about what you're thinking in terms of your research topic this week. Short to the point, doesn't have to be a huge amount of information, but just give me an idea of where your focus area is so I can start to be thinking about what common areas we build research teams around. And I will give you some opportunity to do some collaborative work in the next couple of weeks that I'll assign you to those teams. So please send me that email. And just a quick recap, we've already talked about this, it shouldn't be new, but your assignments for this week. Chapter 3 in Mertler, complete the article Jigsaw, complete the activity Revising AR Questions, and complete the 2 research abstracts. I am signing off. Thank you guys for being amazing as we get started in the process, and have a great week.